So I'm really excited to introduce to you Joanna Miller from the New York Civil Liberties Union, and she is the policy counsel who has directed the development of the Dignity for All Students Act. Welcome, Joanna.
Thank you so much. I was really glad to hear that introduction because it seemed to me in preparing for this event that Buffalo is really on top of this issue and that you guys are really leaps and bounds ahead of many other school districts in the state on just getting on top of the bullying issue before everything from the Dignity Act comes into play. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the ins and outs of the Dignity Act are, what you can expect to see over the next 2 years. So we're in a 2-year implementation period on the Dignity Act. And I'll explain where we're going with that. And I'm also going to talk about setting realistic expectations for young people and making boundaries for young people to have a safe space to exercise First Amendment rights and have privacy rights, but also to feel safe and comfortable to come to adults when they're having these kinds of issues. So just quickly a little bit about me. I'm an attorney in the New York City office of the New York Civil Liberties Union. We have a Buffalo office here in the area. The guys who are filming me are from our Buffalo office, and our local folks are always available. If you have questions or anything, feel free to reach out to them. My email address is going to come up at the end. You can feel free to email me anytime. I've been working on the Dignity Act since I started at the NYCLU, which, as you can imagine, is not the entire history of the Dignity Act. I haven't been there all that long. The Dignity Act actually passed the New York Assembly 10 years in a row before we got this bill. So it has been kicking around for a while. Quite a few people have been hearing about it and maybe not knowing exactly what it was all about. But this year we finally did get the bill passed in the Senate and Governor Patterson signed it into law. So I'm going to start, we're going to get into the law stuff, but I wanted to start with something that's a little more interesting. So this guy, we all know this guy, right? Pastor Terry Jones from Florida, from Gainesville, Florida, home of my alma mater. This is a proud moment to be a Gator. So in late 2010, Pastor Terry Jones announced that he was going to burn copies of the Quran. He invited people to send him copies of the Quran to burn. His slogan, Islam is of the devil, appeared on T-shirts, appeared on billboards, obviously the internet. He was all over the news, sort of international outcry. Everybody's seen this guy's face. And even though he backed down from the event at the last moment, amid, who knows, everyone calling him, Hillary Clinton calling him, everyone calling him to say, please don't do this. That message, his message, is out there in a big way. And in that debate over the Lower Manhattan Muslim Community Center, that message was very resonant. And what we could see in New York while this was going on this fall, his message was popping up not only in sort of the quote-unquote appropriate place to come out with your, hateful, horrible message in your free speech environment, doing your protest, but it was popping up in schools. And what we saw was young people, very aggressive, anti-Islamic bullying and harassment of Islamic students or students who are perceived to be Muslim. So I want you to keep him in mind. Then we have a couple more fellows up here. The guy in the top also from a protest of the Lower Manhattan Community Center. And then down in the bottom, we all remember this summer, the healthcare debates, some of the signs that really, were definitely maybe crossed over into the side of poor taste, but obviously these are all protected First Amendment, protected speech for adults to do in the right arena, and this is where they did it. But I don't want to kid ourselves when we start talking about this stuff that somehow young people are shielded from this message, that they're not picking up on this, that they're not in tune to what the people on TV, to what their neighbors, to what their parents, in some cases, the messages that they're getting that may reflect racist, homophobic, or hateful or fearful imagery of other people. So I think it's important that we think about the context in which our young people are really growing up, a 24-hour news cycle in which the loudest and the most obnoxious and the most sometimes really horrifying voices are getting the most coverage. And so when we ask our young people to come into school and put on their civility hat and their tolerance hat and their sensitivity hat, what can we do to give them the right tools to understand why school is different than when you're on the street? Why is school a different kind of place? And how do we hold them to expectations that are really higher than the expectations and the standards that we hold adults to in their daily lives? So we're really dealing with a balancing act. And the way that we see that at the ACLU, obviously First Amendment is one of our very core, most basic concerns at the ACLU. So we really try to think about how do we balance students' rights to attend a supportive school, to learn, to feel comfortable at their school, with other students' rights to harbor and express horrible beliefs that, you know, maybe don't gel with the kind of school systems that we want our children to be a part of. So teaching students why certain speech is inappropriate, but also teaching them to respect their own First Amendment rights and also other people's First Amendment rights. And what does that mean? And where is the right forum to express your First Amendment rights? To respect student privacy, their opinions, the legitimacy of them as whole human beings and not just as entities that come into school and then leave. And also to establish high but realistic expectations and not to expect students to rise up to a level that we haven't taught them how to rise to or why to rise to. So what does the Dignity Bill do? So these are some just bullets that I pulled out. We'll talk in a little more in detail about what they mean, but some of this is probably already familiar. It sounds to me like you guys are doing a lot of work in this area, so some of this is probably going to be familiar. So the first thing on there, and I think the first two kind of go together, so schools are going to be required to designate an anti-bullying coordinator. That's every school in New York State. It's going to have an anti-bullying coordinator. That's one person in the school who's going to receive in-depth training. The law describes it as human relations, but what we're talking about is sensitivity, tolerance training, training on what is discrimination, what is bias-based harassment, what is bullying, and how to best address those things. There's also a broader staff training mandate in the bill, which doesn't say this many people have to be trained or even that anyone has to be trained, but that districts are going to have to create guidelines and identify model training programs for teachers or professionals to seek out that training and make that available to them. There's also a sensitivity and tolerance curricula component, so obviously we can't just train the adults in the school, we have to also train the young people. The best way to do that is to make this part of their core curriculum. Teach them why, you know, what I was saying before, teach them why school is different. Why, when you walk through that school door, do you have to get along with the kid next to you when your parent or your neighbor or the guy on TV is telling you that person is your enemy? Enhanced transparency. This is one of the things that makes our New York State law really novel, actually, is that each district is going to be required to report material incidents of bullying to the state on an annual basis. Material incidents, that's legalese, doesn't really mean anything. We're going to be getting regulations from the Commissioner of Education that are going to give us a little more information about what is a material incident and when do school districts make that determination. That reporting, just so you guys know, is probably going to go through the online reporting systems that you're already using in your districts to report under the Safe Schools and Education Act, the SAVE Act. So when you report the violent incidents or things like that, it's probably going to be under the same infrastructure, so it won't be requiring you to learn like new computer software or anything like that. And actually New York State was really in a good position to receive some funding for the Dignity Act because we already have such a good infrastructure for reporting these kinds of incidents. And then the part that your superintendent spoke about, which is adding age-appropriate plain English versions of this law into the Code of Conduct for students and parents to read and understand, and that would appear every year. So, and then the big bullet, this is all starting with 2012. So there's a little bit of time still, and I don't want to induce panic with anyone like, oh, we have to go home and write Code of Conduct language, although it does sound like maybe some of this is already being done up here. There is some good news. So the good news is that the State Education Department has been working with advocates since this bill passed to create a task force that's going to start to design some of this model language. It's going to seek out and recommend training programs that are good. It's going to negotiate on behalf of the whole state with organizations that offer training to work out deals whereby teachers can do this at low cost. And that task force is already in the very early stages of the regions are working on right now putting the task force together. To give you a little idea about who's going to be in the task force, there's 5 seats for advocacy groups. The NYCLU, we are one of the seats. GLSEN, you might be familiar with GLSEN. The Anti-Defamation League will be one of the advocacy seats. There's a seat for NYSET, so teachers will be represented. There's going to be a seat for administrators. I'm not sure right now if that's coming from the union or how they're going to select who's in that seat. And then we also have 1 seat for a parent and 1 seat for a student. That could be a rotating seat if that parent or student can't commit to the whole year and a half that we have left. The other 20 members, the reason I didn't put them up here yet is because we are still in the process of negotiating who they will be. But I can give you an idea. We're hoping to have someone from the governor's office on the task force. There's 5 members from the state education department. Obviously, they need to be represented. And there are some folks from New York City. New York City has a local anti-bullying law that they passed in 2008. Well, the law was passed in 2005, and the Department of Education implemented it starting in 2008. So there'll be someone from New York City on the board. There probably will be someone from NYSSBA sitting on the task force to represent school boards, and some other folks as well. The task force is going to preside over hearings, public hearings around the state. We're working on getting funding for those, where the community members can come and say, this is what we're concerned about, here's what we really need help with, and also where we can do some give and take. We're also hoping to have an online portal where anyone around the state could send in their concerns about bullying or things that they really want guidance from the task force on.